tough so quickly. So many people.
And here I thought that
lost their jobs, lost their homes, lost their way of livelihood. That is
these pants I'm wearing are fitting because my butt's getting bigger.
completely overwhelmed the community
Because I'm
chest
pregnant.
organizations, the soup
No,
kitchens.
it's just the
There was
fact that
no
I
way
didn't
they
have
could
my other
handle it.
pants on there that had the belt on them.
And so, as the decade progressed and the
Funny,
Great
huh?
Depression continued, folks began to try to find ways to try to manage this burden. And one of the ways for communities where people were coming in was to try to exclude folks who they would claim didn't belong.
And an easy target was all the newcomers driving into LA on Route 66.
Some folks began to say, all right, folks who aren't working now, they have different options. Maybe they should be getting back to work. And if they aren't, then why not?
Newspapers and politicians at the time often referred to these migrants as indigents, vagrants, transients, or bums.
Mm-hmm. People are exhausted, and I think some of their sympathy is starting to run out.
You know, Z might be up there sleeping. He's one that goes to bed early.
In 1933, LA elects a new mayor. His name is Frank Shaw.
Or he'll take a nap.
And he has a reputation for being anti-migrant. Here is Bill Lasher, author of The Golden Fortress, California's border war on Dust Bowl refugees.
Shaw advocated for a county-wide anti-indigent ban in the 1930s and sort of the early days of the Depression.
But there's a catch.
The problem is that Shaw was born in Ontario, Canada.
Shaw is Canadian. He is ironically a migrant himself. And also,
there's not good evidence that his parents ever had him or his brother naturalized.
And if that's the case, it means he's not actually eligible to be LA's mayor. It's a scandal in the making. And when Harry Chandler, the publisher of the LA Times, catches wind of the story, he sees an opportunity. He goes to Shaw and says, let's make a deal.
As the story goes, at least, he agrees to hold back those reports that are alleged to prove that Shaw is in fact a Canadian. And in exchange, he gets Shaw to agree.
I put some nice soft blankets
Davis
and stuff down there for those cats.
Chief of police.
I was looking for my little bolt thing.
Had been fired a few years back.
That I had two of them.
After the
I can't find them anymore.
Crash in 1929.
I don't know where they went.
He had a reputation for playing it loose when it came to people's civil rights.
So I want to go to Dollar General and buy 4 or 5 more of them. They're only $1.
And others, people in the Los Angeles Chamber of Commerce, want someone like Davis who isn't as concerned about the criticisms that happen with anti-labor activity to be there at the head of the LAPD.
And it works. Davis is reinstated as the LAPD's chief of police with the express purpose of picking up where he left off.
The gloves are off, I guess, and
That's Gracie, isn't it?
Davis hits the ground running.
Yeah, I believe that's Gracie.
Before the Red Squad, the anti-communist policing unit.
That's why I thought it looked like Z because it's her mama.
Political movements and things like that.
His mama.
Starts to try to smear people perceived to be labor agitators.
War to a finish. War in which every radical head will be stomped back into the earth as quickly as it rises.
And of course, Davis keeps the interests of Chandler and the other business leaders of LA in mind. And they, in turn, scratch his back.
Should have bought some Ritz crackers.
That Chief Davis and his co-workers in Los Angeles are fighting the battle of all of Southern California, and they hold firmly in check the subversive activities of radical agitators.
The Los Angeles Times, which as much as anyone really supported them, would report how they were sort of controlling the Reds and getting rid of the criminals and all of that.
Suppression of violence commended. Colonial War Society praises Chief Davis and local police force.
This time around, Davis gravitated to the attention. He wanted everyone to know that he meant business.
He was a very media-friendly person. He loved to take pictures of himself looking tough, pointing guns at the camera. He really embraced the image.
The state's incoming migrants quickly became the focus of his policing work. And by the mid-1930s, these efforts were particularly pointed at single men, which Davis and critics would call hobos or vagrants.
Those were the folks who were considered a threat. They're unattached. They're potentially prone to criminality. They're prone to labor disruption. And if you have a single male who doesn't have a family to provide for, no children to provide for. All those types of responsibilities tend to engender not only sympathy, but responsibility.
Speaking to a group of Hollywood women in 1934, Davis made it clear that his fight to rid the city of vagrants was an extension of his work to rid the city of communists.
Americans are asleep. In 2 to 6 years, communism will be a reality in the United States if drastic steps are not taken to check it.
Davis and LA's business elites feared that poor migrants coming into the state were more likely to join a labor movement or vote for socialist ideas, which they saw as a growing threat in California.
We mean mass production under modern conditions. The land workers are to have the best land and the factory workers the best machinery.
In 1934, Upton Sinclair,
Most famous as a muckraking journalist, he wrote a book called The Jungle about the Chicago meatpacking industry.
And until very recently, a socialist.
He runs in the Democratic Party, and to everybody's shock, he wins the Democratic primary, and he runs for the governor of California. And he devises a plan called EPIC.
End poverty in California.
this is Upton Sinclair, speaking later in his life about his upstart campaign.
And of course, EPIC suggests something important and something wonderful.
And this stuns the civic leadership in Los Angeles and across the state. They're scared to death because these policies seem to reflect a direct assault on business as usual.
They fear that their hold on power is going to falter.
So they get to work on a smear campaign to discredit Sinclair.
They develop a message to counter Sinclair's campaign. They paint him as a radical. They paint him as a leftist.
They even suggest he's a Russian agent.
I'm going to vote for Upton Sinclair. Can you tell us why? Upton Sinclair is the author of the Russian government, and it worked out very well there, and I think it should do here.
And then they enlist the Hollywood studios, who obviously want a part of this as well.
A lot of Hollywood bigwigs do not want radical politics. They want a nice, business-friendly LA. So they chip in and help produce so-called newsreels that would run before feature films at movie theaters.
They create these fake newsreels. They have these actors hired to portray unemployed workers coming into California, riding the rails and saying, I'm coming to California because I heard Upton Sinclair is going to be governor. And once he's in there, I'm going to be able to take advantage of these great resources that are being provided for me.
California is going to be clear of poverty, and everybody gets things for nothing.
Upton Sinclair tries to fight it, calling it the lie machine. But it's a loud and inescapable campaign.
And it works. He's defeated fairly easily.
James Two Gun Davis is watching this election unfold. He sees the growing fear of migrants, and he gets an idea. On February 3rd, 1936,
135 officers in squads of 7 and 7 leave Los Angeles. They drive to 16 stations around the state of California. So anywhere where there's a domestic state line.
Arizona, Nevada, all the way up to the Oregon border. So he spread them out along this huge border, hundreds of miles long.
Alongside highways and near rail crossings.
And he arranged for all of them to be deputized by the local police or sheriff's office up there.
To legally work as law enforcement officers in those counties.
The papers call it the bum blockade. And all along the California border, LAPD officers set up and wait.
You're listening to Throughline from NPR.
The programs you enjoy on Colorado Public Radio are made possible in part thanks to generous sponsorship from Right Water Engineers, a member of CPR's Colorado Corporate Partners Program, a showcase of companies that make a difference in our state. Right Water Engineers is a proud sponsor of the Colorado Shakespeare Festival and broadcasts of the Metropolitan Opera. You can learn more about Right Water Engineers at rightwater.com.
have a moment when you learn the truth behind a story and it changes how you think about a whole lot of things? I'm Brooke Gladstone from On the Media, and we have that experience every single week. It's kind of a rush. So join us at WNYC Studios on the Media. Saturday evenings at 8, and again Sunday afternoons at 2 on KRCC and CPR News.
Support for NPR comes from the station and from Jarl and Pamela Mohn, focusing on civil liberties, foster youth, public radio, and the arts. From Uma, a cloud-based phone service for any size business, with an automated virtual receptionist, video meetings, and other features to connect to customers and coworkers anywhere at uma.com/NPR. And from the Skoll Foundation, dedicated to powering social innovators to transform the world. Learn more at skoll.org.
You're listening to Throughline from NPR. I'm Randa Abdel Fattah.
And I'm Ramtin Arablouei. Today on the show, producer Anya Steinberg tells the story of how a Los Angeles police chief named James Davis tried closing California to migrants fleeing the Dust Bowl in the 1930s. LAPD officers set up in 16 locations all around California's border. The papers called it, quote, the bum blockade.
Part 3. That do-re-mi.
While the worker on the survey observed the officers, about half the automobiles were allowed to pass without any inspection.
In 1936, the California state government released a nearly 400-page report on migrants to the state, and an entire section of it was devoted to surveyors' eyewitness accounts of the LAPD's border blockade.
A beautiful new Packard sedan with 4 passengers was signaled to pass, the officer turning to the worker, remarking, "We would make enemies if we stopped people like that." A 1929 Ford Roadster, dripping water and oil with a homemade trailer attached, came to a stop under the canopy. The police beckoned them to halt.
They would try to discourage people who looked like they were very poor from coming into California.
That's Cal State Los Angeles history professor Mark Wild. And this is Bill Lasher, author of The Golden Fortress, California's border war on Dust Bowl refugees.
It's being enforced very subjectively.
The old car was lacking paint in spots, spattered with oil-soaked dust, and probably not washed for a year or so.
If it's a rundown car, it might be stopped. A man traveling alone is more likely to be stopped.
The family totaled 9. The oldest boy, 18, sat alone in the middle of the trailer. Heaped around him were what appeared to be all the worldly possessions the family owned.
Questioning them, asking why they're coming in to say where they're coming from, who they are, what their name is, proof of work, proof of means, or proof you have somewhere to go.
A check with the police revealed that the family were coming to California for the first time to see the wife's sister. They had $30 in cash. The captain of the highway patrol informed the travelers that it would cost $20 to clear the licenses on the car and trailer. For 10 minutes or so, the scene was tense. The mother clutched her baby girl to her as she broke out in sobs. The boys sat quietly, staring into space, waiting for their parents to decide. The father, unshaven and unwashed, silently took his place behind the wheel. The father turned the Ford around, and the family of 9 went back over the road they had traveled, having denied police the privilege of fingerprinting them as not wanted in California.
Surveyors' reports of the blockade told a story of inconsistency. The police stopped hitchhikers, cars, trains, and buses coming into the state. In some places, migrants were fingerprinted, And those prints were sent off to LA and to Washington, D.C. to check for a criminal background. Some were detained in local jails. Others were just turned around and sent back across the state border. To pull off the blockade, from a legal standpoint, the LAPD was relying on an anti-indigent state law that had been passed in 1933.
That prevented the importation of people into the state, quote unquote, likely to become a public charge.
A public charge, meaning they would be a drain on the city's coffers.
So the law itself is sort of representing that ideology, and that then becomes the legal justification for the bum blockade. They weren't trying to stop all migration into California. They were trying to stop certain people from coming in.
As soon as the LAPD's border blockade was rolled out, it made headlines.
Most public officials chatter at length in print about the desirable things they are going to do. A few do things first and talk about them afterward. While the interminable talkers at Sacramento are fuming and spluttering, 136 of the city's finest are on the job, turning back undesirables.
I could find people who both supported and opposed it.
Hobos of America will fight in the courts, if necessary, to preserve their constitutional rights in this city's current Border Patrol campaign against indigent transients.
The debate turned on a question of character of the blockade's targets. Were they victims of economic circumstance who deserve sympathy, or were they arriving due to some cultural or moral flaw? Were they unwilling to work?
Why should California become the stamping ground for undesirables, professional bums, men and women who come here merely to live off others?
The phrase that Davis often used was won't workers, that they refused opportunities that were available to them in their home communities or in other parts of the country, and that therefore we did not owe them entry.
In this sense, the blockade was building on sentiments that already ran deep. Cities and towns had always struggled with the question of what to do when desperate people showed up on their doorsteps. And anti-vagrancy laws had existed since before the U.S. was even founded. In the 1930s, LA wasn't even the only place that tried out a blockade. But still, backlash against the blockade spread, and it was reported out in newspapers across the region.
Bum blockade is merely LA publicity, says Oregon Governor Martin.
A California state senator called the program
damnable, absurd, and asinine.
Some of the sheriffs in border towns refused to deputize Davis's officers.
I do not intend to place county officers and taxpayers in a position which almost certainly would lead to lawsuits.
And a newspaper publisher near the border of Nevada said,
people here are anything but friendly to the plan. In fact, they don't like it a bit. So far, they think it's just a lot of hooey.
In the pages of the LA Times, Davis was given space to defend his blockade and to keep people updated on how he thought it was going.
February 5th, 1936.
I doubt if the people so ready with criticism of this plan know the facts. The hordes of indigents are coming with the idea of getting on relief rolls, begging, or stealing.
February 10th, 1936.
Within 36 hours after placing a blockade, the tide of foraging floaters was turned.
And on February 12th, he took to the airwaves.
Los Police calling all cars, attention all cars, Delta 116. Be on the lookout for Eddie Griffith. Described as American, age 23.
Calling All Cars was this sort of predecessor to shows like Dragnet and other cop shows.
The show was based on real cases from the LAPD.
It's sort of a propaganda machine for the LAPD.
And now we present Chief James D. Davis of the Los Angeles Police Department. Good evening, friends.
That week, Davis had a special story prepared for critics of his blockade.
The killer, whose career of crime will be unfolded for you here this evening, was a typical migratory criminal who entered the state in the parlance of a hobo.
The killer, a man named Eddie Griffith, had embarked on a crime spree, traveling from Seattle to California by hitchhiking and riding the rails.
He came into California without money, without any visible means of support. He sought to forage in green pastures, even if he had to rob and kill to do so.
And before he launched into the story, Davis made his case.
Tonight's story is the true story of one migratory Englishman whose criminal career under a proper fingerprint and border patrol program might have been nipped in the bud.
If something like his border blockade had existed, Davis said Eddie Griffith never would have made it to California. The only hitch was, there was no Eddie Griffith. The story wasn't true. It was a dramatized version of a couple of police cases, stitched together and embellished. And the same was starting to seem true of the entire premise of Davis's border blockade. His claims about hordes of dangerous migrants storming the border were seeming flimsier each day.
While Los Angeles City cops huddled in the high Sierras, engaged in a war to save California from the hobos, a checkup showed the war was dying out due to an almost complete lack of hobos.
Police Chief Davis claimed that they turned away thousands of migrants at the border. I think that's hard to verify.
This is Elisa Minoff, a scholar who studied Davis's so-called bum blockade.
They only actually stopped a small number of people.
On March 17th,
the Attorney General of California finally issues an opinion and says that no, the police chief cannot do this,
calling the blockade unconstitutional. He says,
organized government, state, county, or municipal, should not attempt the achievement of a laudable purpose by unlawful means.
California's one state in a sisterhood of states.
As other states must do unto California, so must California do unto them.
By the end of March, things were looking grim for the blockade's future. The ACLU had organized a lawsuit against the blockade, which newspapers reported was only dropped after police intimidated the lead plaintiff. Bad press about the blockade continued to pile up. Most of all, it was expensive. And so in early April, after a little over 2 months, the blockade ended. Its demise came quietly, without any fanfare or headlines in the paper.
I think it was fairly obvious to most people at the time that this was for show, that this was not making an appreciable difference in migration into the state. Lots of people were still coming in. It was fairly easy to get around the blockade if you needed to.
Looking back from the perspective of history, no, it was not effective.
In 1938, James Davis's career as police chief ended. For good this time. He was forced to resign after it was revealed that he'd helped cover up the bombing of a private investigator who'd been looking into corruption in the LAPD. Davis spent the final years of his life sailing aboard a tuna trawler and collecting his pension. Meanwhile, California's attitude towards migrants changed.
With the arrival of World War II, suddenly everything slams into reverse.
The U.S. starts ramping up the war effort in 1940, sending supplies to Allied forces in Europe.
Suddenly, California and many other places say
Get a ball.
As many migrants as possible because of the building war effort. And so communities that might have wanted to exclude people before are now desperate for them.
And in 1941,
I was going to say, get one of those golf balls. He'll play with that.
They wanted what?
You can drop on a couple of those golf balls. He'll play with that.
The case revolved around a 1933 law. The same anti-indigent law that Davis
golf
used
balls.
as legal justification.
Golf balls!
He loves those golf
The
balls.
plaintiff had been caught bringing
I thought you
his
said
brother,
cell phones.
who had no job and no money, into California.
Well, I had to
Justices
wake up
ruled
daddy's
in
kitties because
in his favor.
It is a
My favorite one.
of citizenship of the
Couldn't see.
United States
The book
to
is in
enter
eye,
any
huh?
state of the Union.
So I took a
We can no longer have any
Q-tip
laws prohibiting interstate
and I rubbed it around,
migration of citizens.
and he opened his eyes. I was like,
means less than this.
I
means nothing.
gotta check the rest
So
of them.
that eliminates that
The other
law
one was like,
precisely because of national defense.
oh my gosh, I can't open my eyes, and then it opened its eyes.
Sending labor to places
But I didn't use the Q-tip on it.
emergency.
And the other little one was all the same. They all could see.
That the peoples of several states must sink or
I
swim
get a little
together.
scared when they can't see like that.
Prosperity and salvation.
Especially it's when it's my favorite little kitty.
Not division.
I don't think they're fighting.
In some ways, Davis's legacy, the border blockade, lived on. Just maybe not with the effect he intended.
It really did lead people to try and interrogate the rights that they sort of instinctively felt were being violated.